So, now it's time to grind the handle. This is a slow, tedious process because if you overheat the metal fittings, you'll burn the epoxy. So you have to go kind of slowly. First, I'll grind down the pins and the thong tubes and peck away at the bolster ends until they're flush with the blade. As I said earlier, I could have ground the bolster ends down before assembly and made this a little easier, but I didn't, so I'm paying for it now by having to go quite slowly. Again, I'll start with the 40 grit belt, grinding all around the knife so as not to heat any particular piece too much. First, I just eliminate all the excess pin and bolster and thong tube material. Once that's over with, here's a very important point. Be aware when grinding handles with metal pieces in them that wood grinds way faster than steel. Of course, you already knew this, but here's the practical result. What will happen if you just blast away, not really paying attention to the effect on the wood versus the metal, is that you'll cause dips where the wood is and all the metal bits will kind of stick up, creating this wavy, dippy effect. Not good. So, what I like to do is run the blade down the face of the grinder. This will force the belt to engage all the hard steel bits on every grinding pass, preventing the belt from accidentally digging into the wood and creating a major dip. Basically, I just keep crunching away at this point. I'm intending for this blade to taper just a hair from the butt to the bolster, so I'll keep that in mind all the time. And I'm always trying to avoid overheating the steel and burning the epoxy. If I feel it getting hotter than I like, I'll actually smash the palms of my hands around the hot piece to absorb heat with my body. At a certain point, I'll also start to radius the handle a little from side to side. I'll do this by kind of rocking the blade. Be super aware of exactly where your blade is with respect to the belt. If you rock the blade around too far and hit the belt with your blade, you've just trashed your knife. Did I mention you need to be super careful about this? I'm making a fairly flat profile on my knife, so I don't need to get really aggressive with the radiusing here. If you plan to sell your work, it's always good to be aware of trends in knife making, and these days knives are getting flatter and thinner. Once I'm happy with the general profile, I'll start moving to higher grit belts. 60 grit aluminum oxide, then 120, then 220, then I start going to my gator grits and my Trizac. I'll end with 6 micron Trizac to put a pretty good shine on the bolster and the pins. Be aware these high grit belts will burn your wood, discoloring the surface of the wood, so go easy with them. If it happens though, don't freak out, it's just a surface phenomenon, and you'll be able to clean it off with fairly fine grit sandpaper later. As you're moving through the various belts, don't neglect to continue cleaning up the radiuses on the inside of the handle and to polish the spine of the blade. I'll also use my slack belt fixture to blend this one little pesky line on the inside of the handle. I'll do that piece at the end with the same fine grit Trizac belt that I used for the bolsters and the pins. I don't show it, but later on I'll go back and I'll clean that up by hand, running very fine grit sandpaper longitudinally down that little piece of the tang. For various reasons, the Trizac belt won't leave a dead perfect surface, so the final step, and this is a matter of personal taste, is to finish the bolster using either sandpaper or a buffer. I'm not the world's biggest fan of knives that look like bumpers off a '59 Cadillac, so I'll give it a sort of soft semi-gloss shine using 1500 grit sandpaper. You can't just scrub away though. You have to do the final finish in long, smooth, overlapping strokes, or you'll leave ugly sanding swirls. More masking tape, of course, so I don't contaminate the wood with a bunch of sanding debris. This would be especially important if you're using brass or nickel silver. If you get brass dust into the grain of the wood, it'll oxidize green and look like ass. At this point, all the joints between the steel and the wood should be imperceptible, both to my eyes and to my fingers. If that joint between the wood and the steel bolster is still uneven, in other words, if the wood is higher or lower than the bolster, drop back a few steps and fix it. Or cover your head with a sturdy plastic bag, put a gun in your mouth, and erase the madness of knife making from your brain. Okay, All that's left to do is finish the wood. I'll start by saying that I highly encourage you to try lots of different wood finishes. Everybody's taste is not the same, so find what you like and then refine your techniques to get the most out of it. The reason I say that is I'll make a confession here about knife handle finishes. I have never been 100% happy with any knife handle finish ever. On a wooden handled knife anyway. Here's the issue for me. If you want to bring out the grain of some outrageous wood, the best finish, in my humble opinion anyway, is nitrocellulose lacquer like they use on high quality guitars. Aside from the health risks, complication of application, blah blah blah, I just don't like that slick plasticky kind of finish on a knife handle. It looks great, but I just don't like the way it feels. And you could do this with polyurethane, water-based, all kinds of other things, but I don't like any of those really. On the other hand, you spend the time and effort to put some sweet looking piece of wood on there, you want to show off the character of it as much as you can, and if you just dunk it in a bucket of tung oil, you may obscure a lot of the detail. All that said, on balance, I still prefer oil finishes from a tactile perspective because they're a little grippier and more natural feeling. That's just me. So anyway, if I'm using an unfamiliar wood, and I almost always am, because different pieces of wood from the same species or even from the same tree may not react exactly the same way as other pieces. So I like to test out several different kinds of finishes almost every time I make a knife handle. In this case, I tried tung oil and it actually looked pretty nice. Sometimes oils like tung and linseed can muddy a nice grain or darken lighter woods to an unattractive degree. This can be kind of awful on a light colored burl wood, for instance. That said, if you're patient and take the time to build up a little sheen, you can get something pretty nice. In this case, as it turned out, I'm using a piece of mesquite burl wood, which is pretty dark and pretty dense. And for whatever reason, it just seems to like the tung oil. So, I spend a couple of days laying on a little tung oil, letting it sit, then rubbing it off. This slowly builds up a thin layer of oil, which will not be hard and reflective and shiny looking, but it will give some depth to the burl and give a nice warm glow to the wood. There's really no rule about when to quit. Eventually I'll just lose patience and stop. It's amazing how many important decisions in my life seem to be made that way. So, patience exhausted, I'll take off the masking tape, clean up all the tape residue, general gunk, excess oil, all the stuff that got onto the metal. When you're cleaning all this crud and goo off at the very end, be careful. You'll often have abrasives that get caught in all this gunk, so you want to scrub it off very gently, moving in the direction of whatever abrasive scratches happen to be on the underlying steel. If you don't, you might end up just kind of dragging some abrasives across the grain, and you'll end up with unsightly scratches that you just can't polish off. So let me make a general point here. If you're just making a knife for Cousin Larry, hey, a lot of the super picky stuff I'm laying on you in this video is really just a waste of time. But if you're planning on selling your blades, one ugly scratch can really torpedo the value of a knife. So the amount of effort you put into cosmetics should really be based on what you plan to do with the knife. Last thing I do is sharpen the blade on the belt grinder, then touch up the edge on my 1200 grit diamond stone to give it that last little bit of nasty. Nasty. And there it is. This is a knife that's half fancy, half simple using knife. If I wanted to make a true safe queen, I would have given the blade a hand-polished satin finish at a minimum, or maybe even buffed out a mirror polish into it. Well, actually, I would never in a million years give a mirror polish to a blade. Just not my thing. But you might like that look, so if you do, hey, go for it. Hey, we never talked about this little hole I drilled. This is called a Spanish notch. It's a sort of simplified version of a Spanish notch. Originally, I think they were intended for trapping your opponent's sword while fencing. But on a modern knife, what it does is it allows you to have a really clean, consistent sharpening line or sharpening bevel running right out to the very end of the blade, rather than having it sort of fatten and smear as it starts to get into the plunge line ricasso area. Neat little refinement, just one of those fun little details that help dress up a knife. Definitely not mission critical though. So, here are some takeaways from this project. First, stainless steel and stock removal are a great combination when you start out as a knife maker. You don't have to worry about heat treating. Let the pros do it for you. Spend your time and your effort and your money on designing, shaping, and finishing. Second, spending 10 or 15 bucks extra on a really nice piece of wood turns what could have been a very bland little knife into something pretty sweet looking. It's no more work, but it looks so much better. Third, bolsters are a pain in the ass. I'm just saying. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and check out my website, waltersorrellsblades.com, where you can find more of my work. You'll also find plenty more videos there that you can't find on YouTube with very, very detailed information about all aspects of Japanese blade making. Also, like me on Facebook at Walter Sorrells Blades.